Thank you, China, for guaranteeing decoupling. There were a lot of reasons to decouple before this virus came out. They actually not only did they blame us for it, but here's the good part. The good part being the bad part. China actually has threatened to withhold antibiotics for political reasons. Once they've threatened our health, doesn't matter if it's an empty threat. Doesn't matter if they meant it. Doesn't matter if they really would have no intention of doing that. None of that matters. The threat is the end of the story. Martha McCallum on Fox News asked CMS Administrator Seema Verma if there were enough ventilators in the country. 10 years ago, MIT had a contest, I guess, to see if the students could develop a low-cost ventilator for exactly this reason. An emergency low-cost ventilator. Students made one with $100 in parts. And I think they used mostly off-the-shelf parts. I don't think they invented parts. I think they just bought parts and assembled them in a little do-it-yourself kit and actually made working ventilators in a reproducible way for $100. Where's my Apple ventilator? Serious question. Apparently, China, I'd seen stories about this, but honestly didn't believe it. I'd heard stories that Chinese officials were starting to blame the United States for putting the virus in China or starting it ourselves or something like that. And I thought, no, they're not. That's crazy. The Chinese government is not blaming the United States for the Wuhan virus. That would just be nuts. And then I saw it. It's actually happening. China, real officials, people with titles on Twitter and stuff, are actually blaming the United States for the Wuhan virus. To which I say, thanks a lot. Oh, man, I just stopped myself from really swearing a lot. my cursing reflex was just right on the barrel there. Thank you, China, for guaranteeing decoupling. There were a lot of reasons to decouple before this virus came out, and I've been one of the most vocal people saying we should do it. Now that doesn't mean we do it tomorrow. It just means that should be a national strategy to get our stuff out of China, move our manufacturing back, and become less dependent, because they actually not only did they blame us for it, but here's the good part. The good part being the bad part. China actually has threatened to withhold antibiotics for political reasons. What? Are you kidding me? We have critical manufacturing in a country that just threatened to use access to medicine as a weapon against us. Decoupling is on. There isn't anything that could stop decoupling now. Let me state this as a fact and see if any of you disagree with it. 4 months ago, when I was putting hashtag decouple in every other tweet, and I was saying, people, we have to decouple. Other people were saying it too. I'm not the only one. But wasn't the general reaction to that, well, that's a little extreme. We're not going to decouple from China. We got our problems. We'll work through it. It's normal. We're not going to decouple. What do you think now? Now that we put critical pharmaceuticals in China, and they just threatened to use that against us. Now, maybe they won't. My guess is they won't use it against us. It would be too dangerous. But once they've threatened, that's the end of the story. You've got lots of variables that you say, oh, how do I weigh this variable, and should we decouple, and maybe we shouldn't, and well, we can work this thing out, and we can work that thing out, and we could put up with this, so, we don't really need to decouple. I see your argument, but, it's sort of a gray area. Not anymore. It's not a gray area now. When a country threatens to withhold antibiotics during a pandemic, that removes all doubt. There's no longer any doubt. Decoupling has to happen, and more importantly, it will. There isn't any chance we're keeping our shit in China anymore. That's over. So whatever you're planning in terms of looking at the future of the world and what's going to happen with the economy, etc., I'm hoping it's good news that we're bringing manufacturing back to the United States. But if you're wondering if we're going to decouple from China, it'll probably be gradual. But it's no longer if. It's no longer if. Once they've threatened our health, doesn't matter if it's an empty threat. Doesn't matter if they meant it. Doesn't matter if they really would have no intention of doing that. None of that matters. The threat is the end of the story. No conversations need to be happened. No debate needs to happen anymore. We need to be on the same side on this. It's time to decouple. All right, it'll happen. Here's a question that's really making me angry. And I don't know the answer to this, which is, why are we not seeing reporting on the ground of an actual manufacturing company in the United States who's going, balls to the wall to ramp up to make ventilators, even if they've never made a ventilator before? Now, is that because it's not happening? Is that because there's only one little ventilator company in the United States and all the rest of them are in other countries, and that poor little company can't do anything, so it's better to ignore it and just people are going to die because we don't have enough ventilators? What exactly is happening with the ventilator situation? I'd like to see a news crew camped out outside of an American manufacturing plant and watch them work 24 hours a day making ventilators that they maybe even never made 2 weeks ago. Where's my Apple ventilator? Serious question. If Apple Computer made a ventilator, and they said, we don't know if or when you'll ever use this, but here's one you can have at your house. It's, $1,000, whatever it is. Would there be enough senior citizens, people like me, I'm in that risk category, over a certain age, have some history of asthma, would I pay $1,000 to have an Apple-made ventilator just in case? Just to have it sitting there just in case. Yes, I would. So Apple Computer, if you're listening, I would buy an Apple ventilator. Now, you're saying to yourself, how hard is it to make a ventilator, right? So an alert follower of my Twitter account tweeted out an article from 2010. All right, so context is important. This is 10 years ago. 10 years ago, MIT had a contest, I guess, to see if the students could develop a low-cost ventilator for exactly this reason. An emergency low-cost ventilator. Students made one with $100 in parts. And I think they used mostly off-the-shelf parts. I don't think they invented parts. I think they just bought parts and assembled them in a little do-it-yourself kit and they actually made working ventilators in a reproducible way for $100. Now, obviously, an Apple-made ventilator would not be $100. It would be maybe $1,000 or whatever. But the point is, apparently it's not hard to make them. There doesn't seem to be too much to it. Now, someone else weighed in, and here's a fact check for you, saying, Scott, it's not good enough just to have ventilators. You also have to have trained operators. If you don't have a trained operator, it's not going to help you with your ventilators. To which I say, seriously, we couldn't, You couldn't do a telemedicine call to a doctor and say, hey, I got my ventilator. Am I putting this on right? And the doctor says, no, you better tighten up the mask a little bit. If I were there, I'd make sure there are no holes. Stuff like that. Is that really a problem? That these ventilators that students can make for $100, and it's just a little mask thing. You don't think we can figure out how to put that little mask thing on our faces without a trained operator and hit the button and turn it on? I don't know. I got questions. In World War II, this country ramped up to produce, tanks and weapons and all kinds of stuff, and we did it pretty quickly. Over in China, you saw them ramp up to create hospitals. They built hospitals in 2 weeks. It almost sounds like I misspoke. China built entire hospitals in 2 weeks. Now, of course, they were temporary, etc., but good enough for the job. We can't build enough ventilators with this much warning. If you give the United States 30 days warning of a problem, we can't build stuff anymore. There's nobody in this country who can build stuff really fast. Maybe. Could it be that our manufacturing capability, just generally has dropped so low that we can't ramp up quickly and build a little device that a student can make for $100? And we can't crank these out by the hundreds of thousands with 2 weeks of notice? What's wrong with our country if we can't? And I don't know that we can't. I'm asking for some reporting on that. So news business, please find some companies in that business and ask them what's happening. And, and can we help? If you said to me, Scott, there's a ventilator company down the road from you, and the only thing they need is more labor, because you need somebody to assemble the parts, and we can't build a robot to do it this quickly, so we just need lots of people just to assemble them. I'd be down there in a heartbeat. I would stand up, I would go to my car, and I would drive down there, and I would start assembling for free. You don't even need to pay me. I'll work all day. I'll assemble some ventilators for you. Just tell me what I need to do. All right? So, very disappointed in the media for not focusing on that problem. Maybe they will. I wonder if 3D printers will ever become part of emergency preparation. Can you imagine having a 3D printer, and I guess you'd have to project into the future, where the 3D printers are just better? And there's a problem that comes up, and the government just sends a blueprint down to everybody's 3D printer on how to print your own $100 ventilator. Could you get to a point where you could print a ventilator? Now, before that, you would probably get to a point where you could print a mask, maybe print some toilet paper. So I'm wondering if the far future, it won't help us this time, but I'm wondering if the future 15 years from now is that maybe it's each town, not each house, but each town has a 3D printer, and as soon as the emergency breaks out, these printers activate and they start printing out the very thing you need for this very problem. Because each problem needs a different set of supplies. So you might have a problem where you need a different set of supplies, and they're going to be limited because nobody expected the emergency. So maybe there's a world where 3D printers become the emergency plan.